If you want privacy, I can go it.
No, it's okay.
Look who's there.
Hello.
Hello, Lucy.
No, I'm muted.
So you're muted. So Zach, so a couple of pieces of advice on the software. You would want to be in gallery view,
Yeah.
which allows you to see everybody who's here at the same time, as opposed to speaker view where you only see the current speaker. So
Cool. Thank you.
And another practical thing, it's a good idea to be muted when you're not speaking, at least when there are several people.
Is there a button for that, or do we have to click it each time?
There's a mute button. Are you're not on a phone or something?
No.
No. Okay. So there's in the lower left there should be a mute button. You can press. You're muted right there. Yeah. And there's also a chat where people might leave some messages, and otherwise that's about all.
All right.
Yeah, and like right now when you're typing, it makes a lot of noise because you're not muted. Just so you know. Lucy, this is my yeah. There you
Hello,
go.
Lucy.
Lucy, this is my son Zachary, who decided.
Yeah, I kind of guessed that.
You could get that. Yeah, maybe we look like each other.
A little bit, but the surname I think was the first sign,
That
and then
sort
I
of gives it away, or the goatee.
Yeah, cool.
We grow facial hair in the same way.
Yeah.
Sort of. Yeah. I couldn't have facial hair. I couldn't have much of a beard here.
No.
Is it a competition, or is it just?
There's maybe a little bit of competition there. Anyway, there should be some more people coming, but they might be late.
Okay.
So, so the idea today, it's about the 6 thinking hats.
Yeah.
Lucy, do you happen to already know that idea?
No, it sounds interesting though.
Yeah, so it was invented by Edward de Bono, who's a big creativity guy. It's a British fellow who wrote a bunch of books and gives a lot of speeches, and who has various ways of making people more creative, lateral thinking kind of stuff. And that's one of his things, that like in order to have an effective meeting, that we should essentially be ready to sort of label what kind of mode are we in. Hi, Heiner.
Hi.
Hi. So the idea is that we should be aware of what mode we're in, and maybe what mode other people are in. Like sometimes if somebody's expressing their passionate feelings about something, and we expect that it should be really logical arguments, it might or might not be. So if we know what it is, like I'm just speaking from the heart, then we will allow for other things than if you're supposed to give a logical argument. So we can go through the different types there are. So like white would be information. That would be, I have something to say here, just the facts as I know them. I'm not trying to be passionate about it or have an opinion about it. It's just, this is what I know. Blue is process or meta. It's like, how is this going? Or I stop for, or like right here, I try to explain how this works. This is like the meta section. So I'm in the blue mode right now, trying to explain how it works. Or if something doesn't work, it's like our timeout, which we have used before, which would be just like, hey, is this working? Let me stop for a moment and sort it out. Hey, Doug. So, Heiner, you already know the 6 thinking hats, I'm sure.
Yes, but I'm always mixing it with my 6 codes. And then I'm getting into trouble if I'm naked or what I have on.
I understand. So if suddenly you appear in an unusual way, we know what's going on. So, yep. So anyway, so blue is process or meta. White is information, facts. Yellow is sort of general positivity. It's going to work. You can do it. That's great. We believe in you. It's just wonderful. I think this will turn out really well. Green is creativity, brainstorming, coming up with ideas. Maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that. Red is feelings, which could include all sorts of feelings, anger, fear, whatever it is. Black, I don't have a good black one that's not shining. Black is more criticism or things that couldn't work, that won't work, being the devil's advocate kind of thing. Yeah, I don't think that works because of this kind of thing. So anyway, so the idea is that if we can label or be aware of what mode we're in, then we can minimize the sort of negative reactions to it. Like if we know that somebody's playing the devil's advocate, here are the reasons why it's not going to work. We don't have to be so affected by why are they so negative. I mean, that's what they're doing right now. And at the same time, it doesn't have to be the facts or has to be true, or if I'm angry, it might not be reasonable what I'm angry about, but I'm angry. So anyway, so that's the idea, that one can have a meeting where one is aware of that. And you probably don't all have like, well, I didn't have any hats to put on, so that's why I have these. So if somebody has 6 colored hats around, that would be perfect. But otherwise, I imagine that part of it is to notice with each other, like, what mode are we in? What's going on here? And is that even helpful? Which I don't know if it is. I should say I have in the past tried to create an online chat room that used this. In the 90s already. It was an old-fashioned chat room, but essentially in that chat room, whenever you posted something, you had to choose one of those hats. So you had to decide, well, I'm just being creative here. You can't just say something. You have to know where you're coming from. But it was with somewhat mixed success. So we'll see if it's useful here. We'll explore some angle of what we can do with that. Where did you go, Zach? You muted your camera or you went away. Anyway, so I'm not sure if you heard my description. Anyways, this is my son Zachary, who, you went to get your hats. Okay. Oh, that you were rummaging through your drawers. That's very well prepared.
Literally drawers.
Your drawers. Okay.
And also, I was eating at the same time, and my girlfriend is sitting by, also listening in on the conversation.
Okay, no problem. Hi, Layla.
Hi.
Hi. So, okay, so there's no set topic, which some people think is strange, but I kind of like conversations that are not don't have a set topic in advance. So, anyway, we can start wherever. So like I can start by saying I have some feelings of sort of trepidation, I guess is the word. Like I'm not sure this will work. I would like it to work. Something like this I would like to work, but I don't know.
I'm afraid that the black hat can't be useful.
I think the black hat can be very useful. I actually personally like the black hat thing. I often like finding what doesn't work, which sometimes turns people off. They might think, oh, why are you being so negative? You right away tell me what's not going to work. Whereas for me, it's actually, I feel that it's part of creativity to sort of go through, how can this work, how can this not work, kind of thing. That gives me more ideas. So it's not that I'm just being negative, but I find it useful, a useful part of that to use the black one. And hello to you, newcomer. The idea today is that the 6 thinking hats, Zachary, my son there, he has hats, but I only have like cardboard pieces. So the idea is, there you go. Is that's your black hat? Anyway, it has to be the right hat. Okay, you're well prepared, Cheryl. So this might be chaotic, but anyways, the idea is that when you say something, when you say something, you pick the right mode that you're in, which is like meta, process, information, criticism, feelings, positivity, creativity. So we can move on. I'm done with my process description.
Just quickly run the colors, and I want to put them in the chat. So yellow is positivity, blue.
Blue is sort of meta or process.
Pardon?
Okay.
So blue is like process. It's like,
Yeah.
how is this going? How does this work?
Okay.
White is like information. It's the facts, just telling straight, this is what I know.
Okay.
And red, that's a beautiful red hat, Gina. That's like feelings of any kind. This is what I feel, logical or not.
Yeah.
It seems right.
Black is criticism, devil's advocate. I don't think it's going to work. Green is creativity, brainstorming ideas, kind of stuff. One thing I noticed, which is, it's one way of being creative, is you can just pick any one of these, and that, for me, that gives me an idea of what to say. Like, I just pick one of them and I take that perspective and I have something to say, even if I didn't before. It gives me an idea of sort of getting started.
I have a question. How do we announce? I'm putting on my green hat now, and I'd like to say blah blah blah.
Green is creativity. So yeah, you just sort of announce it. You say what you're going to do, and if you don't know, then we'll help you. We will maybe notice, oh, that was a green entry or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That was Cheryl who asked the question, right?
Yeah.
Cheryl?
Yes.
When I was in meetings and we used to actually have major discussions, people would just verbally say that all the time. Okay, from now I'm going to switch to this hat. So we didn't play one role in a meeting. We would actually play many roles in a meeting.
Mm-hmm. I like
Yeah.
it.
Fun.
So I'm optimistically hoping that by being more aware of our mode of communicating, it can sort of waste less time or go more clearly to the point, and also allow some things to be communicated without obstacles, that we don't have to resist what somebody else is doing if we know what kind of mode they're in. They're just being angry. It's okay, I'll be present for that. I don't have to fight it. That's what I hope.
Okay, so I sort of feel like this is going to be very exciting as we actually categorize people's comments, because often in our own minds, we have reactions, and this will be an opportunity to have those reactions and say, I am being angry, or I am being optimistic. So you don't have to judge me. I'm judging myself. I'm putting it out there.
So I'm going to use pens since that's the closest thing at hand. And I just like to say this whole exercise for me is completely anxiety provoking. Because being ADD and unable of thinking about two things at the same time, I'm trying to figure out, am I focused on what color for what where in response to somebody or in connection with what I want to say and whatever, and it sort of is taking up a lot of bandwidth that takes me out of like listening. And I'm complete.
Just went to my office because we have some cards. But I have the problem, I don't have black. So it needs some, how do you say, preparation to be prepared. And I also want you to be prepared. I'm having since a couple of weeks some problems with my Wi-Fi. So even now my system tells me low system resources. So I might be fading away, and it's not for searching for black cards, but as I'm lost.
Yeah, your sound is really weird, but one can sort of hear you gargling in a glass of water. Now, one thing that this does for me is it addresses sort of one irritation I sometimes have in a conversation, that somebody might be talking, but they themselves might not know why they're talking. They just maybe feel it's like their turn and they should say something, but they don't know why they're saying it and they don't know where they're going to end up, and it might or might not be useful. Sometimes it turns out to be useful, but sometimes it's not. So this kind of exercise can sort of help with knowing, well, what are you doing here? It can maybe even help having something to do by even randomly picking a mode. That's sometimes better than sort of struggling to see if you maybe have something to say when you don't.
Yes, I would say that I tend to feel very impatient when people are rambling because they don't realize how long they're talking for. And the rest of us are just waiting anxiously for them to stop, even though what they might be saying is really fun and meaningful. But God, can't you sum it up a bit, please?
I feel like this will be very beneficial for finding more perspectives and more things to be able to express. Like the idea that you don't know what you're thinking or what you're saying, but if you take the 6 different hats and try to say something from each different perspective, that maybe it'll make things clearer.
One thing that went wrong in my previous attempts of doing that, like in a chat room, was along the lines of what Doug was mentioning. Like if one has to at the same time think of, well, what am I doing now? Well, I just want to say this, but I don't know if is that a feeling or information, or it's a mix. What the hell do I do? So people get confused about how to do it, which takes away a bit from the conversation. So I've had mixed experiences with that in the past. You are muted. You are muted.
So on that point, it's interesting how much introspection is required to try to dial that in subjectively. Like I was, it takes time. But I could also see it as well, actually, that's a change of subject. I could see it as a process worth practicing as a discipline. And I'm complete.
This is a bit like the idea of the semantic web, which some of you more technically oriented people might know about, which was an attempt of turning the web into a more structured thing. So essentially, whenever you set something, it would also be categorized as what is it, who does it relate to, what places, what people, that everything is like labeled. And the problem with that is that somebody has to do that. If it's not happening automatically, then whenever you say something, you have to attach a bunch of meta labels on it, which is really complicated and you don't always know. It's really fuzzy and it makes it really annoying to have to, if you have to do that every time. This is this big overhead. So it never really caught on despite it being a good idea.
Could that not be done with procedural learning and a program that could detect the different language and syntax? And because each time we're talking about feelings, for example, these I feel this, I have that, and benefits would have much more positive language. I think each hat has its own language attached to it. Isn't that not true?
You're probably right, and probably AI will do a better job at it. You can't really ask people necessarily to, whenever you say a sentence, you gotta like categorize it in 10 different ways. But AI could potentially do that and could maybe recognize it based on your choice of words, your facial expression. Like it shouldn't be that hard to see that what you said was mainly this kind of thing, and a computer can probably do that better than we can. So a way of getting there is some kind of automated AI that watches us and puts us in different categories, and that's maybe useful.
Actually, not sure that it rises to the level of AI, because I and a partner and a group of other people have been noodling around the platform that doesn't exist, that everybody needs. And all the technology to transcribe in real time and to do just sort of advanced text analytics and you know, it's the stuff they use for customer sentiment analysis, like when somebody's pissed off in a email they send to the company. And our vision was very much that in real time, there would be a signaling mechanism. So if somebody was experiencing a trigger or a reaction, negative or positive, that there would be a way of signaling everybody to that sort of meta level of experience and presence.
And I agree with you. That's probably not quite AI. I mean, it might be as simple as the words one is using. So it could be so simple to do that there would be a little light that goes on over our window that, hey, Doug is angry right now. He's using some bad words. That must mean he's in the red one or something. I mean, that could be fairly trivial, maybe. So that's an idea that in a communication channel like this, there are some little indicators that go on based on some relatively simple analysis of the words you use. Or something other, stress in your voice or something like that. And still, that's not really AI, but there are ways of measuring it. Or using other indicators. What if we had your heartbeat or something else, your pulse or something else that showed that, hey, juices are really flowing here. That must, if we know that, which we might not be able to see with our eyes, but with a little computer help, we could be more informed about what's going on.
Yeah, and I think that actually, it's not so much AI as it is big data. And when I was working for IBM, I became very, very frightened by the amount of data mining that was going on, even within what we would call here chat. And as we became aware of just how far-reaching big data, like your facial expressions and who your network is, it actually got to be very scary, but intriguing.
I would also like to add that the intonation is so important. We have the same word, and the way you say it can mean so many different things. And we humans are interference machining. We are interpreting, we have a lot of assumptions, we have a cultural backpack, So we interpret a color like your beautiful red color of your hat. In another culture, it might be golden. It might be green. So the interpretation of that, what it means, is so local. And now we are using this telecommunications, and we assume other people understand us the same way, but we don't. And then we really start getting into trouble. So I really warn you, and we've been loving AI, but I feel like with Weizenbaum, we should be very careful. Is it not dumbness and wrong assumptions? So it is not smartness and intelligence, but the next step to a big fight.
Well, I think that even though, I mean, we feel we're sharing each other, we're sharing ourselves quite a bit here. We're on live video, we're speaking, it's being recorded. But in another way, to have a deep and useful conversation, I think we kind of need more. So, which opens up to some worry about, well, who's recording this? Is Zoom or Google or somebody keeping that? And what's the problem with that? But really, I would want to see more. Like here, when Heiner mentions for the 20th time Anthony Judge, and if I don't know who Anthony Judge is, I would like sort of want a little thing to pop up that allows me to sort of see, oh, he's this guy. He wrote all these articles about this, and okay, I see. I'm going to look into that afterwards. So it's not just something that Heiner said, but it's a reference that I can use with something. So that's one of the information, the connected information would be nice. In addition to all these, the emotional and tone of voice, I would want to see it in some kind of augmented reality way, which is likely to happen in some form. So it's not just I'm listening to your voice and seeing your picture, that's all, but that I can see it and somehow work with it afterwards. I can touch it in some way. So I hope that we or somebody finds ways of adding more perceptions or more channels, more peripheral vision to our kind of conversations.
I'm going to take a stab at it. Being the devil's advocate here, if we are being monitored by AI and everybody gets to see what we're thinking, we're feeling, how we're acting, what we're saying, what we're putting out there, wouldn't that make us a little more responsible for what we say? And wouldn't that openness, I don't know, I think that transparency could make for more authenticity in our communications, especially once we get used to the idea that what we put out there is really out there now, so be careful what you say. Think about it for a minute.
I personally think that sounds great. Like all the problem with what we're sharing or whether it's too much, it's a problem when we're sort of all in between, that we're living our lives in part privately, in part publicly. And when information is being used against us or to manipulate us, but if we imagine that for one reason or another, for better or worse, we end up with everything being transparent all the time, there could be various ways of getting there. We can discuss whether that's a good idea or not. But what if, what if we all developed telepathy? So we all knew everything that everybody was thinking and what was going on all the time. We just couldn't hide it. It was just technically impossible unless you were wearing tinfoil hats. But everybody who are not, you could get what they were thinking all the time. If that happened, well, we would have to adjust a bunch of things. We would have to become more authentic. I mean, people would know right away when you're bullshitting, when you don't mean what you're saying. And ultimately, that would be a good thing. So what's not a good thing, well, I think, or imagine, I'm not sure. But if everything was wide open, we would find a way of making that work. The problem is when it's sort of in between. We don't know which way to go. Should we go back to privacy and leave Facebook and Google and run special apps so they don't track which products we liked and that kind of thing? I don't know. Some people are going that direction. Other people are like, well, it's probably a good thing. Let's figure out how to work with it.
Well, you obviously saw my reaction. Oh, I felt so frightened because I remember watching the movie Circles, I think it's called, where you're actually seeing people on a daily basis and having to be totally authentic and transparent, and it is seeing into how human we are, and humans are not perfect. And so I don't want everybody, I'm afraid if everybody knows that I'm just pretending to be nice, because right now I just think that would work out better for everyone else. So I'm very frightened if we're trying to move to something that is too transparent and doesn't allow for discretion. And if we were policed based on that behavior, we could be Stepford wives and things like this. Ooh.
Or maybe we would get used to this, and this would start to come naturally instead of us having to think about the colors and everything. We would just get used to relating to each other in this way, and maybe get used to the fact that we aren't all so perfect. And so we would come out with kind of a more realistic view. And it occurs to me that if you have something to hide, that's when you have a problem with this transparency idea. If you're sneaking around trying to do something that's advantageous to yourself, maybe at the expense of somebody else. Just being the devil's advocate.
Or a surprise birthday party. What about surprises that are pleasant? That would take away all the fun.
Maybe there would be different.
Well, the problem is when it's asymmetrical. I mean, really, if we all knew everything about everybody, it could be a good thing. But it's not such a good thing if it's the police and the government who knows everything about you, but you don't know anything about them because somehow they're exempt or something. So, I mean, if we really knew also about everybody who would think of policing you, that would sort of put a nail in their tire kind of thing to So the danger is that somebody succeeds in making a surveillance society which is only for us regular folks, but not really for the people who should be monitored nonstop 24 hours a day.
I think one of the pieces of that puzzle is we've been in the surveillance society place, like that's where we actually are currently. What's beginning to emerge are folks with technologies. What's coming to mind are the holochain folks, but there are folks that are coming up with the sort of flipping of that paradigm, where systems are distributed. There is no central point of data aggregation, so there's no mechanism for third party or other to either control data that's personal to individuals or manipulate or mine it or use it as in an exploitative or oppressive way. And on the flip side, sort of restoring power, authority, control to the individual over their data and their representation expressions and artifacts in the world. So if I have control, then I'm in a position to decide who I want to share with and who I don't, and how broadly or narrowly my, my identity, feelings, thoughts, or whatever are disseminated, and I think that's sort of the holds the promise or potential answer. And that's the underlying premise, I think, of Holochain, and I suspect there will be lots of others on the heels, where, my identity, persona / identity is controlled by me, and it's encrypted, it's not violable, and it's not held by anybody. It's also held by me.
So I see that in the world, we've got China going toward full disclosure of everything. and all the bad things that come with it. And then we've got efforts like Holochain to go back to securing our privacy, which is touching on what Fleming said about it's got to be all or nothing. Everyone's got to play the game or not. So my creative response would be, it should start with the government being transparent. We should experiment with that for a generation and then let the rest unfold with the rest of us, if we're going that way at all.
Taking things for a slight tangent, not worrying about the abuse of such a system or who has to be on the system, but just on the benefit at the same time of having, for example, the possibility to see when people have a tendency to use one color or another, or how it changes a conversation when for example, a green idea would pop up, then we know that the subject is going to change a little bit. When a black hat pops up, we know it's going to go back a little bit. When it's a yellow hat, it's the good side. The blue hat, trying to control everybody. And it's interesting to see how that would interact with different people. And also when interacting with people, having the context of knowing what they usually are. They very often wear a black hat, and sometimes they'll wear a yellow hat. It's interesting to see their own balance internally for themselves and for people interacting with them. If you know they're always wearing a black hat, it's like, okay, he's a black hat, that's fine.
Well, this kind of stuff is also a way of sort of amplifying the blindness. Well, not the blind, but our perceptions. Like, humans are surprisingly bad at recognizing the signals we're presented with quite clearly. Like, we give off lots of signals all the time. It's not that hard to know whether somebody's sincere or whether they're lying right now. You're watching them on TV in high definition. You can see every pore in their face. I mean, it's not that hard to have the ability to read that, but a lot of people are strangely blind at that. So they try to register the words and think, well, it sounds like he really means well, where the other half of the population can see that's a lying bastard who's just trying to win. Or so this kind of stuff, adding some other technological or other ways of signaling, is a way of amplifying it. The stuff that we really should be able to pick up ourselves, but for dummies, here's a way that making it more clear that, like, this guy is only ever talking black hat. He's criticizing everything all the time. If we add that up and show that next to his face, then it's maybe a little more clear. So it's a way of amplifying some signals that we maybe would have missed otherwise.
I feel like when people can identify for themselves and even for each other what mode that person is being in, it makes it less personal in the way of saying, oh, that person is just always a pill, or that one sucks the air right out of the room. It's got nothing to do with their personal value, but more of a different way of analyzing. And that all those ways, once covered, probably add to the decision in a good way, as long as everything is covered well.
And I sort of feel that when you're trying to get across to someone who's a black hat, it's very challenging. And so I sort of feel like it would be fun to say to the black hat, okay, just so that we can get to a place of better understanding, could you be another color for a while? And force them to work through the difficulty of seeing from another perspective. And I find that very helpful.
Yeah, I think there's often things go wrong if somebody shows up pretending to maybe just give the facts, the information, where really they're doing this. This is not going to work because I hate it and I'm angry, so therefore this is not going to work. But they pretend that this is what's going on here. You're wrong. So by making that more clear, there's less of a problem. We can see what's going on, maybe.
I'm feeling like I just can't keep up with this. There's things I want to say, and then I'm like, shit, what color is that? And then it's moved on, and I'm trying to look for another place to get it in, and then it's moved on again. Okay, what would it? Right, okay, we'll try. I should take this off. Then I think, or maybe it's both. In fact, then I think, well, who decides what's negative? Who decides what's creative? That, seems like, is it one person who understands more that gets to decide when someone's being negative? When, I don't know. I think it's a little bit challenging. How we would use that, for example, in the context that you mentioned, Fleming, with this arsehole who's saying all of this stuff that other people can't see. What's the hidden agenda? Who would it be who gets to categorize that?
I would think that both sides would have their own perspective to give on it. I mean, you have what you're trying to give. I'm trying to give facts. And the other guy's like, no, you're not. You're just being cautious. And so therefore, both sides have their perspective, and being aware of that allows them to absorb the information more effectively. So I think that the evil person will be like, this is what I'm saying, believe me. And because he's trying to portray this, we have that context. And if we actually stop and go, wait a second, where is he really coming from? And then we get a much better context. There's always that distance between what we're trying to say and what we're actually being understood as.
We have the same conversation about language and meaning of language. And the truth of this is, an individual's level of self-awareness, confusion, or lack thereof as to where they're coming from informs their contribution code. Then there's the collective experience of that individual's contribution, which could be completely different, but it raises the issue of how do you signal a consensus around everybody taking the color as different than what the person is serving. And then you have each of the individuals who are making that decision with their own cognitive bias and mindset that has a margin of error of whatever, from 0 to 100% in their judgment. So I'm not sure that the fundamental sort of reductionist concept of this as a practice actually helps. Given all the tacit, invisible signaling that is going on in parallel.
It could potentially be that, well, not everybody has the bandwidth for doing it all the time, but there could be ways of sort of adding a signal to somebody else's thing. Like you're talking, Doug, and it doesn't work for you to figure out what color you are at the same time, but the rest of us, we're just listening. We can maybe more easily see, he's giving information, that's good, so I give him a white dot. And maybe we don't all give the same thing. For somebody else, it might be, he's sharing his feelings, so I give him a red one. But that might give sort of a heat map kind of thing of, well, how are we seeing it? Which might be helpful for you to see how you're being perceived. It might be helpful for others to see, we don't agree, or he's telling us something useful here, or this is a meta perspective, I didn't catch that kind of thing. So we can use our free attention to help each other doing this. It's too much to ask one person to do it, plus one would tend to do it wrong. Like usually we don't know ourselves if it's really useful what we're saying, but somebody else probably would.
What if somebody invented something where you would put your dot up, what you think you're doing, and then everybody else, and without names, their dot would pop up of what they think you're saying. Then you see what everyone's thinking just by numbers. Like a lot of people might agree with you, but some might think of something else. So now you're getting feedback. I think it's a learning process. This would be a really great way to learn what you're thinking, how you're coming off. I don't know. Some introspection, even that you would just take into the world afterwards, even if you didn't always put that up, you would be thinking it a little more.
Maybe I have to explain why I'm wearing a black hat, or because I think I'm a permanent black guy, but I decided to take now the blue out. It's about process. When looking a little bit back into De Bono and his systems of the 6 hats and the 6 codes, he was going much deeper, maybe creating much more confusion. But the green code is, for example, about rules, and the red code is about events, and the yellow code is about functions. So I look very much into such schemas and grids and how they can be misleading, but they're very helpful for blind spotting, to see what is a person permanently leaving out, or what this person is trying to ignore or cannot see because it's in blind sight. So anyway, I wonder, Fleming, did you look a little bit further into the 6 hats and the 6 codes, or why do you use this De Bono scheme only? Because in the publications, there's a lot of confusion about the colors and the functions.
I'm not aware of the 6 codes. I've certainly heard a lot about the 6 hats. I've read several of De Bono's books. They all say more or less the same thing. They're good, but he really only had to write one. In part about well, maybe I missed the one that has the codes. I don't know, but I wasn't aware of it.
No, it's a major part. The book on the 6 codes came out later, and it was all on his drive for creativity. Again, read all this with Tony Judge, and I might need to leave very soon. But I just wanted to question you, because there's so much space between the colors and the meanings.
And yeah, of course, this is sort of oversimplified. Like, how can we dumb everything we say down to 6 different categories? That's in part why we have trouble with it, because it sort of mixes it, and it doesn't necessarily cover everything. So what I find interesting and hopeful is sort of the idea of having ways of signaling to each other, which is kind of similar to some of the other things we've tried in this group in various previous experiments, having ways of saying, well, stop, you're sort of talking too much, or time out, let's stop and talk about it, or move on, or okay, we got it. We've tried different ones. We haven't used them very much lately, because we got better at reading each other. But it's the idea to have ways of amplifying for somebody who doesn't get that they're talking too much, like some kind of dots or something that shows that, well, we got it, or we would like to know what you're doing here. We don't understand. Please give us an idea. So any kind of signaling is helpful, which is part of the takeaway from this. And I certainly wouldn't hope for ending up with a fixed thing wherever we say something, we have to say it's one of 6 categories. That would be absolutely a horrible dystopia that wouldn't work. But some part of this is useful, I think.
Also, having to have everything stuck in the 6 hats means that there's also some thoughts that are in between that we would therefore avoid thinking, because we wouldn't be able to categorize them. That could create difficulty afterwards.
So going back to I mentioned the semantic web, which in part didn't work because he was trying to have sort of fixed categories for everything, and the work needed to put things in there. What is somewhat got replaced by was the idea of tagging, which was sort of a low-key way of adding information to something. Like, if you didn't know what categories everybody were going to have, and if they were going to agree on them, you could at least let people add some keywords. Hashtags is another way of doing that. Different people just add different keywords, and if they happen to end up agreeing that a lot of people use the same keyword, well, then we can sort of aggregate that somewhere and get some meaning out of that. But so instead of trying to impose a system that people had to use, let people use whatever they think of, but then after the fact find a way of sort of adding that up and seeing which ones are most popular. It's not a perfect system either, but it's sort of a more ad hoc kind of thing, which tends to work reasonably well.
I think in terms of your point, Cheryl, that it would be really interesting to get feedback on a color of how you're speaking. So what am I feeling right now? Am I feeling like I'm aware, I'm not aware, am I confused? But if I could watch my tracking, do you remember the mood rings? I'm thinking, oh, look, here's Gina's dialogue and what colors are coming through. She's smiling, but she's really nervous, or she's really impatient. Something's going on in her. But if I had my own feedback, not only would that help me better understand the things I might not be paying attention to, but it might help other people say, oh, she seems to be moving towards this or that. Or we see that she has no way of looking at herself from this way. Maybe we could help. Not sure if that's helping.
I like that because often we're not aware of what we're doing. So that could go for any of the hats, like somebody who thinks they're just sharing their feelings. Well, they might be, but they might be sort of missing what they're really feeling. So a little bit of coaching and what are you actually feeling like in your body, maybe. Sometimes we label things as feelings. That's really just some thought we're sort of stuck with. And same with information. We might think we're giving information when we're just sort of hoping that this might be right. So some feedback on that. If you think you're doing this, but other people see it differently, could be useful to become more aware of that.
I keep on thinking about how this can be totally turned into the same stuff that we have, a political process whereby, let's say, I think that I'm offering facts, and then everybody else out there starts making votes strategically, politically, to kind of move the power person that they don't want out by disingenuous voting. And how there would probably have to be some kind of chip implanted in our heads to make sure that we're being truthful.
It's a problem with, well, many kinds of transparency where it might have the wrong side effects. Like one example I remember back when I made the New Civilization Network, which was an online social network, I added a lot of features sort of similar to some things you do on Facebook today. Like I had friend lists, and I came up with this clever idea that people could categorize other people by how close a relationship you had to them. Like, is this an acquaintance? Is it a friend? Or I called it a comrade, somebody you would like trust them with your life kind of thing. And I made 3 arbitrary categories, and then everybody started categorizing everybody else in the network with what were they. But people had very different ways of doing that. For some people, like myself, I would carefully think through, is this really a comrade? Would I trust him with like my kids, my life? Would I turn my back to him if he had the gun? I would think things like that before I clicked comrade, where other people were like, oh, I just love everybody. I mean, everybody who's a member of this network, they're of course my comrades, all of them. So I'm just going to click everybody. And then other people were like, I made the mistake of making one public list that had a list of people who had the highest rankings. I thought they would be the most trustworthy people. But that's not what happened. Then people started gaming each other for, they're like, well, why am I not your comrade? I voted for you and you didn't vote for me. So it became just a bloodbath of people like fighting for position. But the idea was good. I mean, it's good to know how you relate to other people. It's good if that's transparent. It's not good if it's gamified too much. So it's very tricky to do.
There's a difference between, I think a lot of people express that they'd like feedback when in fact the truth of it is they'd like affirmation. And, truth is a very interesting thing. Beware what you ask for.
Mm.
I think the difficulty ends up being that we have a good benefit when it's local, but when we try to make it too global, all of a sudden it always gets abused. Right now we're talking about like the idealistic point of view of it, but of course we always have in the back of our minds what's the worst abuse that can happen to it. And like Fleming said, that it's better when the system doesn't have to have a top 100 people, because apparently when that happens, then it easily gets abused. But that, of course, is with any system, with any benefit, there's always a possible of having what's the opposite of benefit? Oh yeah, downside. So it's more for me the advantage of what it is that we have our own intelligence of how we are interacting with the world, instead of just here's all these words, I don't really care, I'm not controlling them. But being self-aware of how we are interacting, I think that's a much bigger benefit for this than I'm on the top 100 of most beneficial people.
I think it's sort of what's the value, what's the underlying sort of collective will, value, awareness, or decision driving that determines whether the outcome is a legitimate reputation tracking, influence tracking dimension, as opposed to the grist for emergence of a meritocracy, and we're back in the old paradigm instead of in new. So, the underlying, the sort of predicate values they're sort of the first chapter in the book, right? Jumping to the mechanism is chapter 3 or 4 down the road.
We can start to gently move on to the meta perspective on how this conversation with 6 colored thinking hats has worked. If you feel like it, you can stop using the colors if you want, or you can keep using them in your life forever if you feel like it.
It's sort of like when E.T. pulled off the cute hat and he was just kind of and then the truth is looking right at you.
Well, this obviously showed that it's a little difficult to use this well, or it's distracting. For some people, it's sort of it immobilizes you, like, because you got to figure out what hat to use, and then you forget half of what you're saying. So it's limited how useful it is. But I find it useful just to explore what are we doing? Do we understand what other people are doing? It shows also the difficulties in that. Yes, it can't be too black and white or red, green, and blue, but still somehow it's useful to do it, or to be aware of it, or to verbalize it somehow.
think it's really helpful in decision making, whether you're working with a group or whether you're just working through a problem on your own, that if you actually looked at a situation and you didn't have a framework for analysis, that you could say, okay, have I covered all these colors, and can I document, and where are the gaps? So much like you mentioned, the blind spots. If I'm so passionate about something but I really don't know what I'm talking about, maybe I should go find out a little bit more about what I'm so passionate about.
I think it's useful for people who have the right heart for it and the right mindset. And I think it's useful to make sure, like Gina said, that everything's all covered. And there's great potential for disingenuous people to manipulate using these tactics. But on the whole, the thing that I like most about it is that it divorces, if we think this way, it divorces what is being said from a personal judgment on the person saying it. It makes you realize that maybe it's not who they are, but what hat they're wearing. And that it can be useful even if it's unpleasant to hear, a black hat or whatever. And I was curious, Gina, since you've done this before in real life, what do you think the most valuable thing was? Or did you see a great potential for political jockeying?
I really saw it as in a group coming to a decision that everybody eventually could agree on, because we switched those processes. And particularly if someone was particularly strong in one area, if they actually had to go through the energy of thinking the exact opposite. So if they're very negative and you say, okay, now you have to come up with 3 positives. And they're like, no, I only want to work at reinforcing how I feel in my belief system right now. I don't want to work at feeling yours. So that's where it really comes. And then you just go, okay, so you get closer to the best possible agreement is what we used to talk about. Best possible understanding.
I think that's might possibly be the most powerful part of it. I mean, just this ability to shift perspective, so you're not just stuck in one. Like, conversations tend to go wrong if one insists, like, I'm just taking this perspective and that's the only possibility and I can't move. So any kind of exercise that forces us or invites us to shift, take the opposite view or somebody else's view, or get assigned a role and see how it looks from there. If you can even do that, then chances are we can work out how we relate to each other without too much conflict.
Fleming, I joined because I really like this de Bono. His approach, as I remember with the 6 hats, was about looking into creativity. What are the essentials? Am I more in the facts, or am in the process, or in the benefits? And when looking further, I remember when the 6 when the 6 coats came up, it was the contextualization. These colors of the hats is more introspection, looking into yourself on how am I addressing a certain quality or approach or benefit. But looking into the codes of the dates, the functions, the persons, the rules, the events, which are the 6 codes he was displaying, then he showed it is very, very interesting to step back to see actually what is going on in such a creativity process. And I remember that there was discussion on mind mapping, on brainstorming, but also quick storming. Morava had this idea to look on how great inventors have been coming to great ideas, and he came to this mainstream currents on what they have been doing, and maybe that should be mapped in a matrix, in a grid of the 6 hats and the 6 codes. Anyway, as always, I enjoyed your session, and I was happy that the system was somehow stable and I had not this squeaky voice like before.
All right. Any other concluding remarks?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. It was definitely out of my comfort zone. And the challenge of, I found the value, the sort of the forced internal inquiry. Like, what is this? Where is this sourcing from? In the categorization of it, which obviously begs the question of what's the underlying energy or motivation if it's falling in a domain that's energetically sort of coming from contrary or challenge or block or, you know, feeling, negative feeling. So, you know, it was, I appreciated the challenge and opportunity in that. Thank you.
I thought it was kind of hard, uncomfortable, but kind of, I'm thinking it's fun to think of how would this fit on top of other things that you've done before, Fleming. Like we, I can't remember his name, but the last time I joined, we focused on one person. How would it be if we chose one person and we gave feedback to what everything they were saying, telling their story? And I also thought, how would it be if we all wore the black hat and we talked about something and then we rotated to the red hat and then the blue hat to see what would come up in the conversation, being limited to taking a certain view. I'm not sure it would be productive if there was a goal, but it would be interesting to see what happened.
Those are very interesting ideas. So certainly it's a way of adding more depth or more making sure we cover everything like Gina mentioned too, or brings out perspectives we're not aware of. Cool.
I loved it. And I think that we barely scratched the surface, and I'm going to look up a lot of things.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I don't know what's next, but certainly this might inspire some other angles on similar things. So thank you all for coming, making this interesting, challenging, slightly uncomfortable, but productive. Hope to see you again. Take care and have a wonderful day.